Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to African Artist Host. My name is Siwa, and welcome to this experience, which is part of the demonstration, Reckoning with Our Shared Racial Past, which is being facilitated here at Constitution Hill thanks to our partners, the Smithsonian Museum of African Art, Moleskine Foundation, and Constitution Hill. We are gathered here on this day to speak about race and demonstration, which is a very big topic to speak about with artists, but with our partners and with the Smithsonian Race Initiative, which has found a way to use and collaborate with artists, but in a way that is regenerative to the ecosystems predominantly across the continent. Smithsonian as an institution has recognized the disproportionate disparities that are happening in the art world, and this experimental exhibition showcasing these artists that you see here with me is a response to that. With that being said, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to Constitution Hill in Johannesburg. I am joined today by the 6 artists, but 5 well, there's 6 in total, but there are 5 artists that are shown in the exhibition. I am joined by, I call her my skinny legend. She's a performer extraordinaire, Siwa. I'm joined by her collaborator, Mocha Jansen van Vuren, a lecturer at the Wits Performance School of Theatre. Film and TV, my apologies. I'm joined by Patrick Bongoy, artist, performer, and what a character. I am joined by another character, Ayana V. Jackson, also performer, documentarian, photographer, and now an animator? In collaboration with Zweli. And next to her
Why
is...
not just an artist?
She's more than that. You're all more than artists. And next to her is Blessing Gobeni, also an incredible painter and recently been experimenting with sculpture, a leader in his community and truly someone who is giving back. And next to him is Luke Radolph, who is trading under the name of Uniform. A designer, I really think of Luke as someone who the intention of everything that they do is so considered, and the reason why all of these artists here are exemplary reasons of they are actively demonstrating something which we are all seeing, but sometimes not necessarily as sensitive to or know how to deal with. Each and every one of them, when we started this, I said to them, I've been given this huge task of having to talk about race, the elephant in the room. I asked each and every one of them, what I know, and I'm fortunate enough to know each Mocha and Nelly as of recent personally, and what we really wanted to talk about today is how they actively demonstrate behind the scenes. There's work sometimes artists do that I don't think they necessarily have to talk about it. I think it's a form of philanthropy, and I don't even necessarily want to think of it as a form of philanthropy. I think I want to think of it as a form of community. Community isn't just an idea, it's a means to connect, it's a means for people to be able to uphold each other. And speaking of our geographical specificity in South Africa, when we speak of Ubuntu, humanity, what does it mean to see people? And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming on board on this endeavor, because I think with each and every one of you, when I explained to you what I'd been tasked with, you each understood, and not even understood, you felt it was almost like a calling to do this, because with everything that we've been through, there have been so many coincidences that have brought us back to the space or to the institution. And I'm not here to talk about their art. You can see their art online, watch their interviews, they're famous. It's cool. But I wanted to talk to them about the work that they sometimes don't talk about, which is how they are helping and walking with people. I want to start with our 2 collaborators who are opening performance of Fake News. I'm not sure if you guys were here last night, but it was a beautiful performance of and truly a response to what was happening in the world around COVID and around how news was being spread across the nation, specifically in South Africa and in the US. Moka and Nelly, if you don't mind me asking you some big questions. I mean, Moka, you at Wits, you technically, this is, I could sort of say, is a side gig for you. Nelly, you have a career as a performer. Why did you guys decide to go back to the University of Wits and work with students? And getting the funding from ARA, the Artistic Research Arts Residency, am I correct? That enabled you to start this process. Why not just hire people? Why was there an importance for you to go back to an educational institution and work with the next generation? And the thing that I'm trying to bring up is you had a choice. You didn't have to do it. And there was something in you that led you there. What was the calling, if you don't mind me asking?
It's a job. It's a calling. I mean, I don't work with students because I'm not in an institution. I'm an independent performer with my roots coming from dance. And my work, in a way, my work is collaborative by nature. Coming back to how I got involved with Wits students, in a way, it's a mock-up project. And in a way, I initiated it. In a way, I think the project is called Fake News, which I initiated probably 2017 or 18, maybe 18. As part of a project I was doing with a dance company in Bonn. And probably it comes back way back from when I did a piece. Actually, we were also collaborators in that project called Black White. Actually,
pun intended.
Unintended? No, intentional. Where actually, I mean, the collaboration was between fashion, animation, and dance or the body. That was Black White, actually. No, Black, how did it go? Black apostrophe and white question mark or vice versa, I can't remember.
Exclamation.
Exclamation. So in a way, this was the collaboration, but it uses the same technology, where you have a camera on the ceiling, and then it's obviously recording what's happening on the floor, and then there's a projection screen. In a way, this has always fascinated me. In Black White, we didn't use it in the way that we use it with fake news, questioning, what we see, how we see, or what we want to see, or how we see it, or what's the truth, actually, in what we see.
And for you, Prof. Jansen van Vuren, are you all about teaching the truth as well?
I think, with this collaboration in the space of the university, we were, I want to refer back to a conversation we had earlier today. The organization or the kind of unit in WITS that sponsored Nelly's residency at WITS that allowed us to develop this work further with students, Arts Research Africa, ARA. They had a conference, and today Nelly mentioned at that conference how how it feels physically to move through the security gates that are at every entrance to Wits. I mean, they're these kind of, it looks like you're going through an egg beater. It's physically insulting. And I think I've just realized recently that I think one of my main interests and thrusts at the moment is to think about and to actively challenge what is public about the public university. So Wits is supposed to be a public university, and yet you have to move through this egg beater to enter, and they have a button somewhere that someone can push when there's a protest that brings down metal shutters. If you're on the inside, you're in jail. If you're on the outside, you are faced with a fortress. This resulted in, and I mean, this isn't, I think, an opinion of mine. I think this is what happened in, I think, early last year. A young man in Thokozizi in Tumba was shot dead with a rubber bullet in Braamfontein because students were protesting in Braamfontein because they couldn't protest on campus. And in the kind of police response, which Wits as an institution obviously doesn't carry any responsibility for, this young man was shot dead with a rubber bullet. Now, if you think about how that securitization of campus relates to that event, and how public the public university is, I think this intervention that we did in some way is burrowing through the walls, taking bricks out, you know. And obviously there are organs and people within the university that are actively working to break down the barriers. You know, Arts Research Africa allowed us to come in and do this project, and to bring someone from outside in, and you know, for the work now developed to come out and be performed here at Cornhill. That's great, but overall there is a problem with how the walls of the university are maintained and how certain kind of knowledge are privileged and aggressively defended against other types of knowledge.
I really like what you just said about systems of knowledge which are defended, and you spoke something about bricks earlier, and I want to throw it to Luke. You generally, and we were having this conversation earlier, you don't just consider yourself a fashion designer. You make clothing for real people. And I think the name of your brand, Uniform, is a part of that. But your uniform, there's something so beautiful about it that its representation is not almost in a gaze, it's almost a form of empowering in the way, firstly, that the clothes are presented and shared in terms of how people see them, and even the people who model for you. But there's something that happens in the back, in your atelier, in your manufacturing, which often designers don't talk about, because we live in a world where sometimes fashion it's cheaper to produce outside and bring things into South Africa, but you made a decision to actively want to produce in South Africa, to work with people in South Africa, because there's a pattern that you'd noticed. There was something that was happening in labor, considering the disparities that we have in that, and how labor has stayed this very stagnant, but cost of living has changed. So why that choice? Why actively choose to work with people like that and collaborate above instructing and telling them what to do? Why? What's the urgency for you?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it is. I think collaboration is sort of really important in everything that all of us do on this panel, but particularly for me, and in terms of where we are in the world. I think it's also about being really intentional. But to get specific with your question and going into clothing, I think, you know, the global fashion world have described and said that they've actually used the word brave, that we're brave to actually start brands here and to produce here and to do production here. I've heard that word being thrown around quite a lot in the past few years, and maybe we are brave, but I don't know. For me personally, it's just something that I never questioned. I just knew instinctively that I would always produce in South Africa, in Africa. It just needed to be that way. I think it's so important, and I think if we keep looking outside for validation, and if we keep looking outside for all the answers, then we're never going to sort of cultivate our own answers here. So I think that's what I'm really trying to do by keeping my production local and also looking at a different side of production, because, you know, Africa is always looked upon as this new production industry that is perfect for mass production, and often you hear people say things like cheap labor. And I think, you know, as awful as that is to hear, you know, we have to try and find ways to counter that so that that's not how people talk about Africa and see Africa. So I think for me, it's important to focus on the details that I do, and also to focus on luxury, or what the industry considers luxury, but what's always been here and what's always been luxury to us. Yeah, and to build those answers, like I was saying, to build them here and to not look outside for validation. And that's why I also explore more detailed work and more luxury work rather than mass production, because I want Johannesburg and South Africa and Africa to be seen as a place of luxury production. I mean, it is, but I want globally, I want that to be reestablished. And I say reestablished just because I don't think the world kind of realizes that Africa is the birthplace of luxury. So I want to be a part of the voices that reestablish that.
I love what you just spoke about luxury, because craft, especially African craft and design, has suddenly been sold back to Africa as a luxury. When here we look at it as something that's attainable. Why for you decide to stay and work with these people here? I mean, I'm sure you could go produce in Milan, you could really find great craftsmen in Spain, but what was the importance for you to work with people here? And I'm sure there's something you valued in labor that you saw as an individual, because I think at the end of the day, that's what comes first for you, is how is the garment produced, as
Yes.
opposed to how is it sold to immediately get to the stores.
Yes. That's just really important and also intrinsic. I just don't know how to think the other way. But I'm really, I'm quite steadfast in that way of thinking. And, you know, a lot of designers, like I was saying earlier, are looking outside for the answers. And obviously there's many places where it's a lot cheaper to produce, but that's never been something that I've thought is of as well. Is it an excuse? I think it's an excuse. And maybe things are more expensive here, but we have to try and make that happen, and be intentional about it. And it's easy for a designer to sort of add different product categories. So for fashion specifically, different product categories, shoes, some crafts that we don't necessarily have locally, to the level that they do, say, for instance, in Europe, where there's a history of that. But I'm adamant that I don't want to create a product if I can't create it here, and until I can create it here.
And make it accessible to the people that it's about.
And make it accessible exactly to the people that it's about. So, for instance, a lot of designers are having accessories and different things made, like I was saying, in Europe or all over the world, and then bringing it back and reselling it. But I don't want to add any product categories that I can't produce locally, even if I'm really excited to add a product category or make something new. If I realize that it's not achievable here, then I just don't want to do it.
And I think it's something about making the choice, right? And I want to come to you, Ayana, who, as someone who's on the outside and almost you're looking inwards now through South Africa and so many other places that you've traveled producing this work of Drexia. Why the importance for you to come to South Africa? Because, I mean, you could be in the US, you could be in Europe. You chose to come to South Africa, and then you chose to come here, but then you found a way to be able to use, for the lack of a better word, your access and your resources and your means to be able to empower and give artists spaces that generally would not have the space. I mean, even look at where you have your studio. It's the kind of space where other young artists who are predominantly starting out and are experimenting. Why did you choose to come to South Africa? And I mean, you've been here for so many years and you're producing here right now in preparation for your show at Smithsonian and have produced across the globe with geographical specificity. But now I want to know, why Johannesburg?
Well, why Johannesburg? I mean, I'm quite evidently, for those who know that I'm from the United States, right, of the African diaspora. I'm a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, and as a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, there is a disconnect with regard to culture and belonging, right? So I come from a family of Pan-Africanists who my grandfather, my grandfather's father, sat at was a follower of Marcus Garvey. My grandfather who was born in 1912, in the 70s, acquired land in Ghana. My father went, our family in Ghana, our adopted family in Ghana would come. So I grew up in the 80s and the 90s with this connection to the continent. Ghana specifically, even though we're not biologically, as you would know, our DNAs are mixed around. But Ghana was very open to the diaspora of bringing, this kind of welcome home that also they just reiterated. This was not the first time that they've ever had a homecoming, the one they did 2 years ago. Either way, but Africa was just a part of my life. Like no one in my family was particularly interested. I mean, we all went to Paris, London, Madrid, but because we were privileged enough to do so. But actually, we were more interested. The destinations were the times that we were going to Kenya, to go to Ghana, and I was the first one to have an opportunity to come to South Africa. In 2001, I did some work with folks that were contracting with the Love Life Foundation. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was doing these projects around Love Life. I came here as a photographer to document some of the things that were going on with Love Life. And then I met Nseklelo Veleko and Andrew Shabangu, two amazing photographers. and while I was still working with the company that I was with earlier, and they introduced me to the Johannesburg art scene. And someone said that I don't just document other people's projects. They were like, oh, she's had other things. So basically, prior to coming to South Africa, I didn't go to any of the elite art schools. I didn't have the pedigree, as they call it. So I was essentially, I was young, and I shouldn't have expected to be someone, but I was essentially no one. And South Africa gave me a platform. Suddenly, through Lolo and Andrew and a few other friends, I was able to kind of get some kind of support, and I was seen in a
Community.
yeah, I was seen as an artist. I was seen as a photographer, and basically my career began here. Coincidentally, I would love to say that it was intentional. Coincidentally, there was a lot of focus on the market photo workshop and photography that was coming out of the continent, but also South Africa specifically, and so somehow I got swept up in this attention from the outside world, from the Americas, from Europe,
Almost looking in.
on South Africa. And so, of course, I was not eligible as an African or as a South African, but where people were also looking at other ways to curate my work as an African descendant, as an African diasporian, I caught the attention. But it's truly because I was on this location and speaking of, how we regard the continent, for a long time there was a period where I had to tease out and remind people, no, I am not South African, I'm Black American. And then they're like, well, but your parents are from South Africa. And I'm like, no, they're not. Why would you think that? And I was like, oh, you don't understand the idea of that, of what would be, in your mind, a reverse migration, where an American would come to Africa for opportunity. But that is 100% my story. I would not have the career that I have had I not touched base on this exact soil and been supported by the artists and the communities and the galleries and the curators that were here. So fast forward, I have the pleasure of and the honor to be able to exhibit at the Museum of African Art, Smithsonian. And, that's a dream. I literally am from the United States. The Smithsonian is the most important institution, is our largest public institution in the country. So if you're ever a child, okay, you think about MoMA, you think about the Whitney, but the Smithsonian holds a different thing, right?
Is it because you're Black?
Not just because I'm Black. The museum is 27, 28 individual institutions. Among them is the Museum of African Art. But I mentioned that because at a certain point I found my pinnacle, at least to date. And at the same time, I was enjoying other successes, and it all came from here. So I decided to create the artist residency program specifically to support South and Southern African artists, because I think there are a few inflection points in my career. Among them is the residency. Among them is financial support. Among them is introductions and networking. So I decided to create something here in South Africa as a way of showing gratitude and also acknowledging that I wouldn't be who I am had I not set foot and spent time and cultivated my career over 15 years in Johannesburg.
I love that. Thank you so much. Gratitude. Speaking of gratitude, and fortunately, some of the ways artists are seen in the art world that we live in is through prizes, and what that entails is support and mentorship and essentially resources for an artist. Mr. Ngobeni, you recently started your own prize, the Blessing Ngobeni Art Prize. I'm surprised you named it after yourself.
It's a blessing.
It is, right? But what was happening at a point in your career? Because, I think I've probably known you for about 10 years. And when I met you 10 years ago, my life was very different, but your life was very different. And something happened during that, in the past maybe 10 years, where your work started garnering visibility, and I feel like there was almost a part of you that decided that this was the work that you're going to do. Almost, I think often as artists, we're so selfish and we're always thinking of the me, me, me. But you decided to use the resources that were available to you, the access that you had to start a prize which would enable an artist resources, and the greatest resource, money, but not just resources. Sometimes the greatest resources that we have are people, things, and places. And people is you, things is a studio, and places are your gallery and all the other institutions and the collectors that you have. Why start the prize? I mean, I know, now we're going personal. I know you've put in lots of your own personal money into it, which, like I said, sometimes you have to be selfish, but you've actively made a choice to give back and support the next generation of artists. And I'll have you know, one of the artists that he supports, Brian Monchiwa, is an artist that I found, and it was because of the prize and the empowering that the prize gave him that I was able to see him at that level of visibility, and that he was able to be strengthened to produce at that level, that I was able to show him at the Turban Art Fair and him enter the market with such strength. Why education?
I think with me,
Or the
I
prize, rather,
wanted,
sorry.
yeah, with me, I wanted to recognize myself while I'm still alive, to honor my presence as a human being, as a black child. By starting this award, for me, because I've been doing a research about how many hours that are being honored to the dead artist more than the living artist, including the pricing of the work. You know, I mean, as an artist, I should eat my money while I'm still alive. And
That's how
share
you see
it,
it.
yeah, and share it with whoever that I want to share with. So starting an award, also for me, it was a protest kind of against, you know, when you are dead, they come, they take your name, they take your work, and then they start inventing things that you are not there, you are dead, you are rotten there, or you are coming back to be recycled as a human being again. I don't know. So for me, inviting young artists to come and you know, take over this space, you know, this creative space, I think is important, because remember, there is no future without young minds. I mean, we were looking up to the dead one, the Gerald Scott or the Dumelefen and them. But who we are, like today, we need ourselves, and then we need to cultivate the young ones to take over when we're dead. So that was the idea behind having the Blessing of an Art Prize. Yeah, it was very painful at the beginning, yes, of course, popping out money, you know. But, you know, through the growth, you meet people, you speak to different people, they start to understand that, okay, you do really, really need the support, you know. And beside, the idea of sharing, you know, I mean, the African child never had the chance to share ideas with the rest of the team, the rest of the black people, because the system made a black child to hate its own, you know. So if we are not alive to live this life where we can share who we are, you know, as a black society, you know. And through that, for me to be this artist that I am, I won an award without having an educational background, but because I had a mind, I had ideas to create things, you know. Then I happened to win an award, you know, which is like a thinger, like people they can do something without this so-called education, if you are willing to change your life, you know. So by doing that, I did not want to wait up until somebody point out like, oh, he's dead, then, you know. But beside that, I mean, like, inviting other people to come, you know, you mentor them, you speak to them. I have, like a lot of people, I have messages, DMs, you know, from across the globe, just to speak to me, you know. And I'm not selfish. I do respond. I speak to these people just to give them, you know, the idea of how to, like a small idea, how to make a small idea a bigger idea. You know, it's through following the pattern, you know. So yeah, I think for me it does play a great role. This is our 6th year, I think, this year, and all 5 artists, they are doing well. They travel the world. It shows that there is something, that I'm doing for the people, than being selfish, than being this kind of leadership that we have where they don't even come just to say, you're doing great as artists. So for me, I wanted to be an example to move away from this stereotype of being black and you eat alone, and do something. It's our responsibility to build. Let's not allow to be destroyed by, the colonial crew that walked into our land and displaced us, created gray areas where we are not able to go back to graze in something. So for me, creating this thing so that people they can be able to walk free across the globe. I mean, it's a willing. Yeah, even though it's painful, but I like it myself. Yeah.
I think also there's something quite special about your story in terms of how, specifically as black people or people who've been racially disproportionately affected by life, your incarceration, there was something that happened there that creativity became a means for you to heal, a means for you to maybe reckon with some of the dark things that you were encountering there. And I can imagine after that time, one would be mad. But you made a choice to heal, but not just to heal for yourself, but to potentially heal somebody else around you, like the young artists that you work with who generally come from disproportionate backgrounds that are disproportionately affected by things like race. How are I mean, and I know another thing I great about you. Blessing's a great businessman. You have found a way to have partners sustain your why. And how do you go to those partners and say, and I can imagine you don't just talk to them about art, you talk to them about your personal experience of how creativity was able to unlock something in you that you were able to make visible to people who might not have had the experience or might not know how to deal with that trauma. If you don't mind indulging me, how or where did it begin, or yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, things, perhaps, the nature wanted me to go through, behind bars and all, whatever that is history, now. But for me, through that, I think I learned to appreciate the fact that I'm not in a wheelchair, I'm not dead, I'm still okay, because the things that we were doing when we were a bit younger, they were not good, honestly. But being in a space where I realized that I cannot stay, 9 years doing nothing. I had to do something. And for me to do something, it was of killing time, like getting bored, and then you think of like, what can I do in a space like this? It's a small space. But I did not know that it will become a drug, one day, that I cannot just move freely without thinking about art, without thinking about my surroundings, things that are challenging my community, things that are challenging my historical background, things that are challenging the country and the continent, and the continent at large, because I believe that being in the creative space, it's a privilege, but at the very same time, it's a right for a person to practice your personal responsibility as a human. So I wanted just to be somebody, to be seen out there.
Not just somebody, you are somebody. Nice to see you. Speaking of seeing people, race in South Africa is one of those things that I'll give you from a personal point of view. I did not grow up in South Africa. I came back to South Africa in 2012. And never, to give you a visual, I was always the fly in milk. And coming back to South Africa, the Rainbow Nation, I was looking forward to the unity and the diversity. And if you remember in 2003, President Thabo Mbeki stood in front of the African Union and promised Africa and Africans freedom of movement and freedom of housing and rights in Africa. I speak to my dear friend Patrick Bongoy. Ça va? Nice to see you. Pat, your work is truly rooted in your experience of migration and coming to South Africa as someone who's from the DRC. And there's something quite beautiful just about you as a person, that the radiation that you have, and knowing the trauma that it took to get to South Africa and settle in South Africa. And now you have gotten to a point where you have people around you that you consider your dependents, but above your dependents, they are your family. They are people who live with you, who work with you, who share the same history, and that you engage with in a form that is, again, just via the labor, but there is something quite dark in the work that you do. Where do you find the joy to be you and carry that light with the people that you carry? Because your work is very dark, my friend.
I'm opposed to that. I don't think it depends on which perspective you're coming with, to say it's dark. Or
Mine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's weird to answer that question. It's like, how did you come to be born? You just find yourself in it, and the actually people are your reflections. You're just doing you, and then seeing people responding differently, and then you realize that, oh, this is what's happening, and as you say, it's dark. Yes, dark as in beauty.
Have you seen me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
But, and you could stay mad and be almost reckoning with all of the heaviness and the, I guess you could describe the forms of othering. And if we think of the forms of othering that exist in South Africa above just race, there's another level of othering, like xenophobia. And we've spoken about like you coming to Johannesburg, and there's something that happens to you when you are in Johannesburg because of the geographical context that we're in, that sometimes is not something that you find where you live in Cape Town.
Did I interrupt?
No?
Okay. I think those things, I believe that everybody experienced that. You go to a place, even in a house, someone else's house, you feel uncomfortable. So these are common, common things. And never really felt that I belong here in this province. Yeah, but then, I also question, what does that even mean? When I have people like Blessing Gobeni, such a beautiful human being, like all of you, beautiful, like, what does that mean, like, so, and I started just, I think, healing myself by being around you, the people who see me, the people I see, and yeah, just start from there, and bit by bit, I really, even amazed how those, things unfolding in a way that I'm actually saying to myself, sorry, that I'm called, to come in this place to process my healing, my healing to the space we are in and its stories, its people.
I think it's interesting that your work that you put up now for this installation is all with silhouettes. Why the silhouette? Why not the actual figurative body? There's some, and you mentioned something about housing and burning, and there's I'm almost thinking of a rising phoenix out of the ash. Why the burning?
I don't know. I think it's something that I just have in me. I'm coming from a group of people who are called metal benders. You know, you call blacksmith. So I think I already have that background, you know, with, you know, like fire and stuff. That's why you call Congo. Congo is, you know, Ne Congo, it's kind of firebender, you know. So,
Is that why your
and
name is Red the Congo?
we are not developing that. That's another conversation. Yeah, it has some link to it, but yeah, I mean, you know, all these processes are really like out of my control. It's just unfolding. I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful to be part of this, you know, beautiful team to heal the space, and purely this journey been hard for all of us, but we're standing all together right now.
I love that you said that we're standing all together right now, because I think with each and every one of you, sometimes the work that you do is quite taxing to the individual when you are thinking of your communities and the people that you walk with. What does it mean for you guys where sometimes you have to be selfish because the world that we live in is so unfair with the people that you work with, and sometimes race is a big part of that, of understanding where other people come from. So I want to ask you guys, doing this work takes a lot of effort out of the individual. How do you guys stay sane to make sure that you can show up in the spaces that you show up and do the work that you do? Because at the end of the day, you're not doing it just for yourselves, you're doing it for so many more. What's the tax? Anybody?
I can say that, I mean, actually, Mocha and I were just kind of talking about the tax, which is kind of, well, we are now, those of us who are moving into certain times in our lives, as we're not 20-year-old artists anymore. We start thinking in terms of how much stress how many minutes or moments or days stress can take off of the ultimate physical embodiment in this body of this lifespan. But you know, and I'm beginning to think about that for the first time more so, but I did have a moment where I had to start to think about how I work. And not just specifically with whom I work, but in terms of like what stories I'm beginning to tell, and I know I hate the term self-care, but I don't hate it. I know it's overused. But I had to learn to care for myself in the process of going so deep. So, you know, a lot of my work specifically, and I'm sure it echoes, is healing. It's something, you know, like me personally, it's like, how am I getting right with what it means to embody a Black woman's body in the 20th century, right? Like, what is that, or 21st century, you know what I mean? Like, what am I carrying? And then how am I gonna dig up and then look at and then tweak and then patch up and then try to like bring it back to my heart, and, you know, and share it with other people who might also have similar wounds and similar traumas, you know, but the process of digging that deep also kind of does leave a certain residue and something in my bones, and, you know, that I had to figure out how to, you know, how to kind of deal with later. So sometimes I find myself skirting towards something that's maybe still within the thematics that I'm interested in, but maybe find a way to not do things so directly painful in order to kind of help myself. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I just think that what happens is, I think some of these things, you can't help it. It's like, that's the idea, that's what you want to do, that's the pain point that you want to like address. And then as you move, you try to do it in a way that's slightly less traumatic to yourself. But it's sometimes a little bit unavoidable.
Because tell
We
you,
literally were just talking about this.
I'll tell you one thing I noticed. I didn't even notice it then. Like I said, I'm the kind of person, I'm always looking for the patterns. I don't know if you guys have walked through the show yet, but whilst you're walking through the show, that you'll notice the body in every work is present. Whether it's in the actual performance, it's in the form of silhouette or sculpture, it's in CGI, almost a mythological manner. It's in form of tension and movement. It's in form of garments and I guess what we could all call as representation, because there's something about the body. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. Have you seen it? Have you been looking at the patterns? And I think one of the beautiful things is having those things, and right, the show is called Demonstration. And the demonstration is the people making something visible. And I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking on this kind of work because, I mean, as you said, you guys are a little bit older, you know, I'm a spring chicken. And it's been such an honor to learn and watch each and every one of you put together your production, study how, and I often say this, the word curator comes from the Latin word curare, to take care. And it's been my greatest honor to take care in of each and every one of you and tell these stories, because in each and every one of your stories, I saw a piece of me. And if I saw a piece of myself, I can imagine everybody else who's seeing the show will see a piece of themselves. So I just wanted to thank you for physically being here and for physically representing a body. With each and every one of you, they're having talks for the next 10 days. This was just the first conversation with each of them. They'll be having a conversation around race in media, race in housing, race in resistance, race in incarceration, and race in representation. I encourage each and every one of you to come, listen to them speak about their works, and maybe start seeing the patterns that I saw in all of their works, because without them being active demonstrators and actively making visible of the problems, I would have nothing to curate. And in fact, the Smithsonian Museum would have had nothing to respond to, because this experimentation is exactly that. It's a response to what is happening on the continent, on the ground. On that note, I'd like to thank the Smithsonian Museum of African Art for coming to South Africa and empowering me and empowering all these artists. Moleskine Foundation, who came to South Africa with curator extraordinaire Simon Jami, and there's a show, if you turn right and right, that has 24 young participants who were challenged over a 7-day workshop. They put together the exhibition themselves, and now their works immediately go live in a public collection in Milan. And Constitution Hill, who, when Judge Albie Sachs was the head judge, saw and recognized that creativity and justice could be something that could be used hand in hand to help South Africa when we're speaking about how are we reconciling then. We here at this point in day in South Africa, and we're still having forms of reckoning that we're dealing with, because the forms of othering are constantly being perpetuated by social media and conversations. And I'd like to encourage each and every one of you to walk through the space, especially now during at night. There's something about the energy, and all of these people have brought together their own individual energy, which has held this project together. Because, and I mean, if I hadn't said it, without you, I'm nothing. And without you, the public, because our demonstration is nothing either. You guys have seen my pattern, my response, and you guys have recognized that there's something happening here. So I thank you for coming to demonstrate. Now I'm gonna open it up to the public if anyone has questions.
So my name's Karen Milbourne. I'm the senior curator at the Smithsonian African Art Museum. I will pass this around, but if anybody has a question for Patrick in particular, maybe let us know now, because otherwise I'm gonna let Patrick go so that he can set up for his performance, which is gonna be in a few minutes. And then we can guide you all there afterwards, but I didn't want to hold people back from having the chance to ask a question if that's, okay. No.
Hi. This isn't for Patrick, so, but um, sorry, I forgot your name. The uniform. Sorry, Luke. Hi, Luke. So, I found it quite interesting how you said luxury in Africa, bringing luxury back, and it is it is synonymous with Africa. But then, and there've been conversations currently on like luxury and black people in luxury, black women in luxury. On Instagram recently, what was Jackie? What's her? Jackie Aina, yes. Problematic Jackie. But but then we live in a country, even though we have a right to luxury, and luxury can look in various forms, but then you're in the fashion industry, which is also problematic, but we like to dress cute, so how do you then, reconcile that? How do you deal with that? Being in a country with high unemployment, things are just getting super expensive. How do we then get access to luxury in the material sense, but then also luxury of like peace of mind, luxury of not having to worry about money, luxury of not having to worry about taxi money. Like I find it crazy that people are going to work just to have transport money to go to work. And those are like in some forms luxuries for certain demographics and certain people who have access, who have. I mean, we live in South Africa, let alone the continent. And then also, there comes a point where luxury can also be very synonymous to assimilation, to whiteness, to colonialism, to even racism. How? Yeah, you had my mind sparking. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, it's not easy. I think you mentioned so many different difficult things about the situation, but I think it also really comes down to, well, one of the things is like you said, the definition of luxury. So what are we talking about when we say luxury, and what am I talking about when I say luxury? Obviously, there's the business aspect, and we're selling clothes. Well, that's what I'm doing, or selling our art. But I think you mentioned a few things that kind of clarify for me what luxury really is, and like you said, the luxury of time. That's one of the biggest things. But also, what is luxury here? What is luxury at home? I'm not talking about what the rest of the world considers luxury. I'm talking about things that have existed here for longer than the rest of the world has had any luxury. And like I said, it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's re-establishing Africa as the home of luxury, rather than looking to us as some kind of mass production resource. There was, I don't know if I'm going to tackle every part of your question. I know there was a lot at the end. If you want to ask me another specific, some from the end, because I've addressed the luxury part, but I'd like to address some from the end you were saying. I don't know the context of, you were saying conversations on social media. I don't know the context of that, so I can't speak to that, but...
Sorry, we can speak afterwards, but also I think it then comes to mind, what does re-establishing luxury in Africa mean?
So I think I just want to re-establish the notion that Africa is the home of luxury, the birthplace of luxury. So if the world is looking for luxury, this is where they should be looking for it. This is where they should be coming for it, and not just where they traditionally go for luxury.
Okay. Thank you. But we'll talk afterwards.
Thank you for the question. It is a deep one. So there's a lot to get into.
Any questions? Yeah, sure. Hit me up. Hit me. Do you want to come sit here?
Okay, now that Patrick's gone, but this is for you, Siwa. When you mentioned that, Patrick's work is a bit dark, so I've had questions like that, like your work is dark and it's heavy. But I think it's what Patrick work does, seeing the context he comes from, seeing how Congo is right now, how the continent is. I think it's truth telling. And oftentimes we can't really pinpoint or deal with the truth facing us, so that we kind of have to it's dark, it's too heavy, because we're not ready to handle it, or we don't want to be ready to handle it. We kind of just want to shy away from what the truth is. That's.
And Patrick and I have had these conversations about his work. And I think there's something about when you have the conversation and you expose each other to each other, where you speak about your vulnerabilities and what makes you the person that you are. And then you get to see that considering the odds that are against them, as each and every individual has, how this human decides to move in the world is something that is joyous. And like I said, I think even in the work itself, sure, visually it might be dark, but the feeling that you leave afterwards with it is one of healing. And with predominantly most of these experiences and installations, there's a multisensory experience. And if you think of the ways that sometimes we carry trauma, is you just see, especially as artists, is you see it just with the visual. But here they smell, they sound, there's tactical. And with sort of thinking with all these things that, yes, we'd call dark or being a heavy past, it almost allows for other things to comfort the psyche, the subconscious that you are not there to deal with. And I think it gets dark sometimes when we go into these isolations where you think it's just about me, or I'm the only person who's dealing with this problem. But I think what Patrick's work beautifully highlights is that the problem is collective, and there's a way that we could heal about it with actually confronting it.
Truth telling. Thank you.
On that note, Patrick Bongoy will be having an installation performance that will be starting in about 15 minutes. If you don't mind having a drink outside, and then we will all be ushered into the Joe Slovo courtyard inside the Old Fort and enjoy the performance. Thank you very much.